This video will be concerned about deglutition, or swallowing. There are two phases in deglutition, or swallowing. The first phase occurs in the mouth, and that's the buccal phase. This phase is a voluntary phase. In other words, you consciously control it. During this phase, the tongue moves up against the hard palate, pushing the ball of food, the bolus, into the oral pharynx. Once the food has entered the oral pharynx, you proceed to the next phase. During the buccal phase, the upper esophageal sphincter is closed. Once the bolus enters the oral pharynx, the pharyngoesophageal phase begins. This is an involuntary phase. It is controlled by the swallowing center in the brainstem. The vagus nerves transmit information from the swallowing center to the muscles within the pharynx and the esophagus, stimulating those muscles to contract so peristalsis can occur. Peristalsis is the contraction of these muscles in the muscularis externa that will move the bolus toward the stomach. During this phase, all passageways have to be blocked except for the passageways leading to the stomach. The tongue will block the mouth. The uvula and the soft palate will rise to block the entrance into the nasal pharynx, preventing liquids from entering the nasal cavity. The larynx will rise, allowing the epiglottis to cover the opening into the larynx, which is called the glottis. This will prevent food from entering into the trachea. The muscularis externa of the pharynx is arranged into two layers. The inner layer is a longitudinal layer, and the outer layer is a circular layer. The circular layer is arranged into three pharyngeal constrictor muscles. The contraction of these constrictor muscles propels the food toward the stomach. This movement is called peristalsis. As the food moves toward the esophagus, the upper esophageal sphincter relaxes. In this illustration, you can see the three constrictor muscles in the pharynx. Remember, these muscles are the circular muscles found in the muscularis externa. These are skeletal muscles. Once the bolus passes into the esophagus, the upper esophageal sphincter has to close. This prevents backward movement. Next, the gastroesophageal sphincter opens. This is the sphincter between the esophagus and the stomach, allowing the bolus to enter the stomach. Once the bolus enters the stomach, the gastroesophageal sphincter will close. Let's review deglutition using the following illustrations. During the buccal phase, which occurs in the mouth, the tongue pushes up against the hard palate. This pushes the bolus toward the oral pharynx. During this phase, the upper esophageal sphincter is closed. The pharyngoesophageal phase begins when the bolus enters into the oral pharynx. Remember, all passageways have to be closed except for the one going into the esophagus. The esophagus leads to the stomach, and it is posterior to the trachea. The tongue will block the entrance back into the oral cavity. The soft palate in the uvula, by rising, will block the entrance into the nasal pharynx. The larynx will rise, allowing the epiglottis to cover the glottis, or the opening, into the larynx, and this will prevent food from going into the trachea. In order for the bolus to enter the esophagus, the upper esophageal sphincter has to relax, so it is relaxed at this point. Once the bolus passes through the upper esophageal sphincter and enters into the esophagus, the upper esophageal sphincter will close. The bolus will continue to move down toward the stomach, being propelled by peristalsis and aided by gravity. Liquids will make their way down to the stomach in about 1 to 2 seconds. and for solids it will take about 8 seconds. The bolus continues to move through the esophagus, as mentioned before, aided by peristalsis. Once the bolus reaches the cardioesophageal sphincter, the cardioesophageal sphincter will relax, allowing the bolus to enter the stomach. After the cardioesophageal sphincter relaxes and the bolus is in the stomach, the cardioesophageal sphincter will contract once again to close.